Okay, so welcome everyone to our Daniel's faculty lecture, Rare Plant Communities in Ontario with Wasyl Bakowsky. My name's Shannon McDonald and I'm currently working on my Master's of Science in Forestry here at U of T. Using LiDAR data and vegetation sampling protocol, I'm modeling forest biomass in urban wooded natural areas. Much of my plant ID knowledge has been passed down from Wasyl, who provided an invaluable assistance during my fieldwork. It's my pleasure to moderate this lecture along with our host, Daniel's faculty assistant professor, my supervisor and mentor, Daniela Purek-Mladenovic. Daniela?
Was Daniela going to have some words as well?
I believe so. If not, I can continue on. Daniela?
I'm sorry, my sound is breaking down. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have Wasyl officially in a lecture such as this one. He has been supporting our research for many years, and he's known by my students probably even more than I am. So I just want to thank him and Ministry of Natural Resources for making this lecture possible.
Okay, great. Thanks, Daniela. So first, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Daniel's honors Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. Please note that this session is being live streamed and recorded. If you do not wish to be captured, please turn off your video. We ask you to keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. You may add your questions in the chat for me to relay to Wasyl, or if you wish to ask your question directly, please put your name in the chat and note that you wish to ask your question on camera. So I would like to introduce to you our speaker for today. Wasyl Bakowsky is the Community Ecologist for Natural Heritage Information Center. The NHIC manages data about the location of species of conservation concern, plant communities, wildlife concentration areas, and natural areas in Ontario. Wasyl compiles information on rare plant communities, as well as exemplary examples of communities which are not rare, such as old-growth forests. Compiled information includes plant community descriptions, species lists, and digitized polygons. This information is used for biodiversity conservation planning, environmental assessments, and natural resource management. Welcome, Wasyl. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Shannon. Just a little bit of background about myself. I did my Master's of Science in on the topic of the phytosociology of oak savanna in Southern Ontario, and it was with the University of Toronto, Arundel campus. So today I'll be presenting on 4 rare types of vegetation in the province. I'll be showing you their distribution, habitat photos showing you what they look like, and some of the distinctive and characteristic plant species that occur in them, many of which are provincially rare. Having a problem here, just bear with me. Okay, so I'll be presenting on showing you the Great Lakes sand dunes, tallgrass prairie and savanna and woodland in southern Ontario, tallgrass prairie and savanna in northwestern Ontario, as well as alvar vegetation. So I'll start off with Great Lakes sand dunes. So here's a really large example from Desert Point on Great Duck Island off the south shore of Manitoulin Island. I've got some people showing up on my screen, and it's kind of blocking part of my presentation. Okay, I think I fixed it.
Okay.
So here's a distribution map showing Great Lakes sand dunes in Ontario. The dunes on Lake Superior and on the North Shore of Georgian Bay are made of acidic sands that are derived from glaciers moving over the Precambrian rock landscape. And then those of the southern Great Lakes, the lower Great Lakes, are calcareous from sort of derived from limestone bedrock. So here, I'll just show you some of the different locations with sand dunes. Here we have Pinery Provincial Park on Lake Huron. This is Carter Bay on Lake Huron, probably one of the best sand dunes. Well, it is the best sand dune area on Manitoulin Island. Here we have Sandbanks Provincial Park on Lake Ontario. Here's some dunes on the mouth of the Mississauga River. And so I just want to mention there is a variation in sand dunes, from highly complex dunes with lots of changes in elevation and blowouts and stuff. But in its most simple form, it can just occur as a low beach ridge. Not a complicated topography. However, the species composition is the same as on a complex dune. Here we have, this is at mouth of the Pick River on Lake Superior. So some of the plants, here we have Great Lakes sandreed. It's a western species, Sporobolus rigidus, which occurs further west, but this var magnus is only known from Lake Huron. So it's restricted to Lake Huron in southern Ontario. Here we have slender blazing star, also a provincially rare species, as was the previous one. Here we have heart-leaved willow, basically restricted to sand dunes in southern Ontario. Another endemic Great Lakes dune species, sand dune wildrye. Again, this is a western species, but the only species we have in Ontario is Samophilus, which is a Great Lakes endemic. Beach pea, this is found in all dunes, and it also occurs on dunes and sandy areas on the Hudson Bay coast. And yeah, it occurs on the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast as well. And then here we have sea limegrass. Like the previous, this occurs on the east coast, the west coast, Lake Superior, and then also on the Hudson Bay coast in Ontario. And wood lily. Another Great Lakes endemic is pitcher's thistle. And yeah, here it is with the monarch nectaring on it. This one is actually spineless. It's our only spineless thistle. And here we have Lithospermum caroliniense. So next up is going to introduce you to tallgrass prairie, savanna, and woodland in southern Ontario. So here's an aerial view of Walpole Island from a photo taken by Gary Allen, who used to work for M&R. And you can see some oak savanna and, with scattered trees growing in an open type of situation. So here's a pre-settlement map showing the distribution and extent of prairies and savannas at pre-European settlement times. This map was created by a student that worked for me. Our office is right across the hall from the Surveyor General's office, so we were able to access the original land survey records and mark out the areas that had this rare vegetation. So you can see how fairly extensive it was on the Oak Ridges moraine, which was cane moraine, dry and sandy. And that there's a strip from Turkey Point all the way up to Cambridge. That's mostly Norfolk sandplain and horseshoe moraines, which again are well drained. Then some fairly extensive areas on the east shore of Lake St. Clair and Windsor, where again, all these sites are sandy. And one of the things that you'll notice is most of these locations have towns, and these towns were built on sandy areas near water because it's a good place to live. You get access to lots of protein fish from the rivers, ease of travel on the rivers. They would burn these sites to keep them open. So because they were open, it was easy for them to have their dwellings, for their children to play, run around. They didn't, have to sit in a woods. Because it was open, you'd have a bigger breeze, fewer biting insects, that type of thing. And basically their villages became our cities and towns. The indigenous villages became our cities and towns. So here's the current extent of prairie, savanna, and woodland vegetation in southern Ontario. Here's a church. It's called the Paris Plains Church. It's northeast of Paris in an area that was originally identified by surveyors as Oak Plains. Here's a wet prairie dominated by dense blazing star and Ohio goldenrod from Elgin County. Here's a shot of mesic prairie from Walpole Island First Nation. This was taken by Gary Allen, again, former M&R employee. Here's a riverine prairie along the Au Sable River. Just occurs as a narrow band along the river. There's probably 4 or 5 of these on that river, dominated by big blue stem. Here's a dry prairie from Alderville First Nation, dominated by little blue stem. Here's the mesic black oak savanna from Walpole Island First Nation. This one is from Altamont Road, and yeah, these trees are huge, and they feel, when you're there, it feels like you're in a cathedral. Here's bur oak savanna from the West Brantford area. You can see how open grown these trees are. They've never, the lowermost branches have, they're almost touching the ground. These are amazing. And then here's woodland from Pinery. So woodland isn't as open as a savanna. The canopy cover could be 50 to 60%, but there's still prairie species in the openings. And most of the savannas in Ontario, because they're not burned regularly, have reverted to this woodland condition. So they still have prairie species hanging on, but they're not as open as an actual savanna. Here's a black oak savanna from Alderville First Nation with sundial lupin in the foreground. It's the host plant for the Carner blue butterfly, which used to occur in Ontario, but the populations became extirpated because their habitats got too shaded in. So Ontario is in a process of reestablishing populations of this lupin with the intent at some point that should their populations be high enough, we'll be able to bring in Carner blue butterflies from existing populations further south in the United States. And just a close-up of sundial lupin. And here's one of the dominant species of tallgrass prairies, the big blue stem. And this was from a wet year, so it really grew tall. This is also commonly found in sand dunes as well. Here we have another prairie species, Indian grass. And then another one, quite showy, Sidodes grama, with the beautiful fluorescent orange anthers. Round-headed bush clover, another prairie indicator. And wand bush clover. We have quite a few bush clover species in our prairies and savannas. Virginia goatsrue. I think this is only known from like maybe 2 or 3 locations in southern Ontario. Butterfly weed, prairie violet. So this is only known from one location, and that was that bur oak savanna that I showed you earlier from West Brantford. The closest population of this is on the western margin of Michigan, which is about 400 kilometers to the west of this location. Dense blazing star, rough blazing star, and spotted bee balm. And this is also only known from one location near Normandale in Norfolk County. So now it's the tallgrass prairie and savanna in northern Ontario. So here's a location near White Lake, Northwestern Ontario, near the Manitoba border. And again, it's dominated by big blue stem. Here's a distribution map showing locations of prairies and bur oak savannas in Northwestern Ontario. And these northern ones up here were discovered by Northern Bioscience. That's Al Harris and Rob Foster from Thunder Bay. They did numerous surveys for Ontario parks over the years and managed to find these during their surveys. And then the rest were discovered by myself and Michael Oldham from the Natural Heritage Information Center. So here's an example of dry prairie. They're on steep slopes, usually south facing. So the dark grass you're seeing again is big blue stem. And then the light colored grass is porcupine grass, Heterostypa spartea. And here's another example of just a dry prairie on Lake of the Woods, dominated by porcupine grass. Here's a dry bur oak savanna on Painted Rock Point, Lake of the Woods. This location has probably 5 or 6 of the rarest plants in the province, all at this one location. Here's a dry bur oak savanna with plains porcupine grass at Boudreaux's Beach on the south shore of Lake of the Woods. Again, just another shot of the bur oak savanna. This time you can see the big blue stem grass on Krieger Road. And just the hallmark species bur oak with showing the acorns. So here's another really rich site. It's dry bur oak savanna again. And it's on base-rich andesitic bedrock. And you can tell that the rock is rich by the orange lichen and the white lichen. They're just covered with this stuff wherever this kind of a rock is exposed. So that this vegetation doesn't occur on acidic, granitic type rock, nutrient poor rock. It's on nutrient rich bedrock. And apparently in Lake of the Woods and elsewhere, geologists would look out for bur oak because that type of bedrock often would have gold in it. So it was an indicator for them to look for gold at these kinds of locations. And here's sort of here's a mesic bur oak savanna from Manitou Mounds on Rainy River. This is a location on the river that has burial mounds, some of them being 2,000 to 3,000 years old. The understory is super diverse. Here's just a little shot showing a little piece of ground, and we've got some showy white lady slipper orchid on the right. On the left, we have Seneca snakeroot. On the very bottom is some bastard toadflax. Upper middle is Gallium boreale. On the right-hand side, there's a smooth aster. It's Aster laevis or Symphyotrichum laev vargayeri. It's a Western variety that in Ontario only occurs in Northwestern Ontario. Here we have blue giant hyssop, prairie June grass, another prairie species. It's also found in Southern Ontario. And in Southern Ontario, it experienced this severe decline over the last 30, 40 years. But in Northwestern Ontario, we probably have it from 60 locations. And here we have autumn onion, purple prairie clover. I think this is known from 3 locations on Lake of the Woods. Here we have dragon wormwood. It's Artemisia dracunculus. It's actually a wild native tarragon. And again, I think this is known from maybe 3 locations. Then Western silvery aster, also super rare. And yeah, I think, again, only known from 3 locations. And prairie sagebrush. This is the sage that indigenous people would use for their smoking ceremonies. And here we have pale showy goldenrod, Solidago pallida, only known from 1 location northwest of Kenora. And when we found it, we thought it was another species called Solidago speciosa, but Dr. John Semple from University of Waterloo, who is an expert in the aster family, thought there was something off about it, and he discovered it was a new species called Solidago pallida. So here's the distribution map of Solidago pallida. You can see it's super restricted. The bulk of it is in South Dakota, and can't remember what's south of there. That's Nebraska or what, but yeah, really restricted. Seneca snakeroot, Pennsylvania cinquefoil, oval-leaved milkweed, brittle prickly pear cactus. So this cactus is also found in a rock barren south of Calidar on Highway 7, and it's disjunct from the nearest population in Wisconsin by I think 800 kilometers. And slender beard tongue. Okay, now on to Alvar. So here's some Alvar from Carden Township in the city of Kawartha Lakes. So a distribution map showing the extent of Alvar. So Alvar vegetation is open vegetation developed on shallow soils over limestone, dolostone, or marble bedrock. And so because of the shallow soils, it's dominated by herbaceous species, with woody species such as trees restricted to local areas where the soil layer is a little bit thicker, in low depressions in the ground or in cracks in the bedrock. So this is at Carden, where they even have named a road after this alvar vegetation. As you know, Carden is popular with birders for all the grassland birds, but also popular with botanists because of the lots of interesting and distinctive species found there. So again, just lots of wildflowers. Here we have Indian paintbrush in orange, the fluffy prairie smoke, and then in yellow we have balsam ragwort. One of the prairie grasses found in alvars is northern dropseed. Here's an aerial view of limestone pavement from Manitoulin Island. And again, the dominant grass here is northern dropseed. And just a ground view showing the northern dropseed again. Here's a bur oak tree alvar grassland at Bend Bay in Hastings County. It's the trees are kind of regularly spaced, like as if it was an oak orchard. Here's a old growth eastern white cedar from Bruce County. These were studied by Dr. Doug Larson from the University of Guelph, and trees like the one in this image were regularly found to be about 450 years old. And a lot of Bruce Peninsula and Manitoulin Island suffered extensive fires in the 1800s. But these alvars, because the soil was so shallow, the fire didn't really carry over them. So that's why these have managed to survive these fires that occurred regionally. So here's just a shot of some limestone pavement with the extremely shallow soils around the margin. And because the soils are so shallow, a lot of the plants that you find here are annuals, because by the summer, the drought is so bad that most plants would die. So the annuals survive this drought period in the form of seeds and come up again in the spring when these areas get wet. So a characteristic alvar species is Panicum flexile, and also Philadelphia panic grass. It has a different habit. It has hairy leaves and stem, unlike Panicum flexile. And here's sort of like an alvar rock garden from Warsaw Caves Conservation Area. So again, in yellow, we have balsam ragwort. In red here, we have wild columbine. These white flowers are rock sandwort. I'll be showing you shots of these individually. And then another typical sedge found in alvars is craws sedge, Carex crawii. Here's a photo from Cameron Ranch in Carden in the spring. So we have early flowering species such as early buttercup, and then also in white, early saxifrage. Provincially rare fern that can be found in alvars is purple-stemmed cliffbrake and balsam ragwort. Wild bergamot, a prairie species that's also found in dry prairies, but common on alvars as well. Field chickweed. Hairy beard tongue, another penstemon. So it differs from penstemon found in Northwestern Ontario. which is restricted to Northwest. And this one is commonly found in Southern Ontario and also portions of the southern margin of the Canadian Shield. And here we have Michaud's stitchwort, which I think I previously called rock sandwort, same common, different common names for the same plant. And white death camas. And here's a kind of a moist alvar at Carden that had a large population of white death camas. And here we have longleaf bluets, also found in dry prairies and dry savannas. And Indian paintbrush, prairie smoke, and here we have sand cherry, also found in sand dunes and dry prairies and savannas. And here we have Tetraneurus herbaceus. It's the bulk of this plant's population is Ontario. It's probably 95% or more of the whole population of this species. And when the Natural Heritage Information Center first started up, we took this plant up and made it our logo. So yeah, that's it for my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wasyl. That was really great. If just a reminder to the audience, you may add your questions in the chat for me to relay to Wasyl, or if you wish to ask your question directly, please either raise your hand or put your name in the chat and a note that you wish to ask your question, and we can facilitate that. So, Valentine, it looks like you have a question. If you would like to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, I actually have two questions, if that's okay. My first question is, how do you see these plants and these plant communities responding to climate change? And is that helping them in their distribution, maybe for species that have a range that's further south, or is that hindering their distribution? And then my second question is a little bit related, but are these, for the most part, plants and plant communities that could survive within an urban space, for example, in people's yards or in landscaping, or are these things that are not really tolerant of the stresses of urban landscapes? Thank you.
Well, I started surveying this type of vegetation starting in 1994, and I can't say that I've seen any change in their extent since that time. Presumably, warmer, drier weather would expand a lot of these communities that occur on droughty sites. And then some of them that are on super droughty sites, like the alvars, potentially their composition can change because they may become so dry that some of the plants may wink out. But it's too early to tell right now. We don't have any evidence of the effect of climate change, and a lot of the effects that are modeled by some projects that M&R was involved in, the changes in forest composition and stuff like that are supposed to change in 30, 40, 50 years from now. So, but I think warmer, drier, especially in Southern Ontario, will be helpful for prairies and dry prairies and savannas. And then some of the species that I showed you have really specialized needs, like that purple stem cliffbrake, you know, wouldn't do, it would be hard to grow, but a lot of these plants are planted in prairie gardens and that type of thing. So a lot of them can do well. I know I have a colleague that used to be a landscape designer in Southern Ontario, and he has put together sort of some Alvar restorations or Alvar gardens, if you will, on the top of buildings. So that grass, that Bouteloua curtipendula with the nice orange anthers, for example, that did very well in his Alvar garden, Alvar rooftop garden. So a lot of these plants, probably the bulk of them, could be planted in a garden in an urban environment or rural environment.
Great, thank you, Wasyl. Sean, would you like to go ahead and?
Yeah, just following up on that, I wonder if you could address seed availability or availability through nurseries for these species. I mean, I think in the landscape and architecture context, people want to know, can they get a hold of these wonderful plants?
Yeah, there's probably the biggest producer of seed for gardens and restorations is St. William's Nursery. That was a huge tree nursery that they closed it, and then it was bought up by private individuals. And they're using the extensive greenhouses and sandy fields to propagate native plant species, including many prairie species, but also, you know, wetland species, forest species, that type of thing. But there's others, you know, there's a place in Omimi that has them there. I think if you go to Credit Valley Conservation Authority website, they have a publication about using native seeds, and at the back they list a bunch of suppliers of native plants.
Yeah, I mean, I found it is quite a challenge if you're after particular species, but you know, there's some things that are available.
Yeah, and for the longest time, people wanted to use native plants for like a semi-large restoration, and the problem was not getting the quantity required. So, you know, you could buy a packet of, you know, 30 seeds or something, but really you need pounds and, you know, pounds of seeds. So I think the Nature Conservancy of Canada on the Rice Lake Plains are growing some of their properties. They're planting them with prairie species just for the purpose of getting their own native seed for their own restoration work. And the same is happening at Alderville First Nation. They have bought some specialized machinery that can go through their prairie and just collect the seeds off it, because they have some really nice intact prairie and savanna, but they also have adjacent areas that are kind of old, like old fields and weedy with knapweed. And so they're pulling the knapweed and then seeding these areas with seeds they've collected themselves. So I see someone has a question about Ontario map of alvars. Yeah, my map did show Stone Road Alvar on Pelee Island. So some of it is stewarded by Essex Region Conservation Authority, in addition to the Essex County Field Naturalist. And then Ontario Nature also owns some of the alvar there. And actually, I think last summer they did a prescribed burn at that alvar because it was shrubbing in spots.
Awesome, thank you. And I believe Michael McTavish has a question that he would like to ask. You can go ahead. Oh, Michael, we can't hear you.
There we go. Better? Okay,
Yep.
Thanks. Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering if you see, to what extent conservation of some of these rare species being limited by the availability of mapping, distribution, sort of survey data, an unwillingness to put resources into that. And if that is a problem, do you see a way forward with that?
I don't know that it's a problem. We do a lot of field work every year, like, you know, I've been doing fieldwork for over 25 years, visiting known locations and also surveying and finding new locations. There is an organization, Tallgrass Ontario, that is looking for tallgrass prairie remnants and savannahs and mapping them as well. And there's I don't know if you've probably heard of iNaturalist, the citizen science thing. So there's tons of people going out and doing field work and photographing and documenting rare species, be it, you know, rare forest species or rare prairie species, savanna, dunes, whatever. So there's a lot of boots on the ground these days collecting this type of information.
Great, thank you, Wasyl, and thank you, Michael, for your question. Daniela, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, speaking about boots on ground, birders and all of that, and these communities being so rare, it's kind of double sword, two-edged, because from one side you want to protect them and make sure that they're there, and from the other side, invasive species pressure. And with all due respect about native plant seed growers, it's a little bit Wild West out there, you know, trying to tap into some of these locations. So any idea how, you know, we need seed, but that needs to be done in a little bit, you know, more careful way, because I'll be honest, it's almost like a fear. Now it's a native. If everyone knows, then we are putting the pressure on these sites. How many of them on private land, public land, anything on a protection per se, or?
So some of the maps you showed and some of the landscape photos you showed, most of them were from provincial parks or some form of protected area. Now, what percentage of the mapped out rare plant communities are officially protected by either the government or a land trust or something like that?
Well, I don't have that information off the top of my head. We have that information in the state of the biodiversity report for Ontario. So in that report, we report on prairies and savannas, alvars, and sand dunes. And in that report, we identify how much area is protected and how much is not protected. It's just, I can't remember those numbers right now. But I think with sand dunes, for example, a really high proportion of them are in protected areas. And at prairies and alvars, less so. But you can download that report and you can find out that those statistics in that report.
Great, thank you. And Verna Valliere has a question. She's wondering if we would be able to contact you to access your mapping information on rare plant communities. They are wonderful and would be very useful to me in my study of medicinal plants in these habitat types.
So that would be considered an information request. So we have an email address that handles information requests. So it's called, all one word, nhicrequests@ontario.ca. And so if you needed this type of information, you would need to email them. They would send you a questionnaire to fill out with explaining why you need the information. And then a decision would be made whether to release the information or not, if it was for a proper use of that information. So if you're involved in a study, you know, that would qualify as a need to know. That's what our principle is. Do you need to know?
Great, thank you. And Thomas Hall has a question. Are there any rare plant species that hold a particular keystone role in some of these rare landscapes, like the Manitoulin alvars?
Yeah, Thomas, could you kind of clarify a little bit more about what you mean by keystone in terms of plants?
Okay, so Thomas, as an essential for keeping species relationships and processes functional for these rare plants, I'm assuming.
Well, there's all kinds of keystone plants then, like some of the dominant species, the dominant plants at a location, some of the grasses, etc., are important for keeping processes functional. But at the same time, some of the rare plants could be considered keystone species. For example, on northern dropseed, there is an insect, I think it's called something like red shield bug. It's only found on northern dropseed. So, and it's a super rare, globally rare, it's a leaf hopper. So a lot of these rare plants have insects that are specific hosts. They're hosts for specific insect species. So, you know, some of the common species are keystone, but even some of the rare ones that would be considered keystone for, you know, the continued survival of super rare insects, host specific insects.
Awesome, thank you. And Catherine Baird has a question. She'd also like to say great presentation, Wasyl. What are the largest threats to these rare grassland habitats and sensitive species?
Well, the prairies and savannas in Northwestern Ontario aren't under any threat. And the alvars, they're fine as well. They're extensive. There's many of them. Probably in Southern Ontario, the dry tall gas prairies and dry oak savannas and woodlands are under the greatest threat because of the absence of fire. And so a lot of them, they may occur as a small patch and they may be surrounded by forest and the forest is moving in. So their areas are shrinking. And so, and then they're also, you know, getting filled with shrubs, and shrubs in prairies and savannas often aren't set back enough from a fire because they have a different kind of a leaf litter, so they don't burn very well. So a lot of these sites need to be mechanically thinned, and then a lot of these shrub species and also invasive species like common buckthorn, you know, they resprout, so they need to be cut, and then the stems need to have herbicide applied to them so they don't regenerate. So it's these type of habitats are the ones that are really under greatest threat. The dunes, they're open, but they're so dry that they, you know, they maintain themselves in perpetuity as well. So
Great, thank you. And then Sean Patil has a question. Any species listed as extirpated, endangered, or threatened under the Ontario SARS list is illegal to possess in part or in whole. So while the space may not have protection to the organism does, oh, he's just answering my question, I think, does not apply to garden cultivated specimens or planted trees. This would inhibit seed collection without a permit. Thank you, Sean, for sharing that information. Oh, and then Jonathan Deschman has a great question. Do you have any recommended follow-up articles or resources that give a more in-depth description of the various prairie communities found in Ontario?
Yeah, there's a number of papers written by Paul Catling on the Rice Lake Plains, for example, and prairies and savannas along the Trent River. And then he's also written some articles on the floristic composition of alvars in Southern Ontario. So there's a lot of articles by Paul Catling. I've written some articles for the Natural Heritage Information newsletter on tallgrass prairies and savannas in Southern Ontario and prairies and savannas in Northwestern Ontario. So if you want to email me, I can provide you with copies of the articles that I've written on these subjects.
Great, thank you. And we have time for a couple more questions. If anyone would like to take this opportunity to ask them, I will ask a question while we're waiting. What, Wasyl, is your favorite plant species that you have found in Ontario since you started investigating all of these rare plant communities?
It'd probably be that Viola pitatifida
Yeah,
from Brantford.
yeah, nice find.
Yeah. So I'll just tell you a story about that. So I sampled that savanna for my master's thesis, and I went there. So I was there in the summer and I didn't come across that violet. So I thought, I wonder if that violet will be there. And so I went there with a friend of mine, a co-worker, Sarah Maingy, and we were on that slope. It's a large pastured field, and we were walking around and we found it. Then all of a sudden we heard this guy call us, and I looked at the bottom of the slope, and there was this big farmer in overalls, and he was smiling and he was saying, you know, what are you guys doing? So he had a smile on his face, but in his eyes, he was like, what the hell are you guys doing on my land? So we explained to him that we found this super rare violet, and it was the only place known from Ontario. So he instantly warmed to us, and he said, you can come here anytime, just give me a phone call in the future. And so, yeah, I've always had good experiences with landowners. I've been super lucky.
Yeah, well, you're a friendly guy, so that makes sense. I think maybe we'll ask this one last question quickly, and then we will close out our session for today. So Verna Valliere has a question. Did these various ecosystems historically rely on burning to be regenerated? And if so, is there any prescribed burning scheduled at regular intervals?
So yeah, historically, these ecosystems, well, what prairies and savannas in Southern Ontario were historically burned, both the mesic ones, wet mesic, and dry ones. The ones that currently exist, if they are on parks properties, Ontario parks, they try and do prescribed burning as they can. And then the same with Nature Conservancy of Canada. They have quite a few properties with prairie and savanna on them, and they're burning these. And in some cases on the Rice Lake Plains, they're actually cutting out a lot of the pine because the pines they're just shading out some of the areas. So basically, it depends on who owns the property. And some people, just private citizens, when they have them, they usually don't burn their properties because you need to have a trained fire crew to do the prescribed burning, and they lack the funds to do that. Just as an example of why I know there was burning by the Indigenous peoples, is in the Norfolk Plain, a lot of that was oak plains and pine plains as described by, or plains or oak plains described by the land surveyors. But as you move northward toward Cambridge, you started getting some kind of different kind of savannas. Some of them had, for example, there would be oak, poplar, chestnut. And what these were is these fires were starting to move into adjacent forests, and they were slowly removing some of the forest species, so that you were starting to get some forest species as a dominant in that type of plains vegetation. So the more they burned, the more forest plants kind of forest trees dropped out of the structure of that habitat.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Wasyl, for sharing with us. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us for Rare Plant Communities in Ontario. And thank you for all your really great questions. To see or register for any of the Daniels events this year, just head to the News and Events page on the Daniels faculty website. The next event in our series is Constructing a Revisionist Architectural History of the Americas, an architectural history colloquium, taking place on Thursday, February 11th from 12:30 to 2. So we hope to see you online again soon. Good afternoon and good night. Thank you for